Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut Remix channel. Today we're going to take a look at this 2001 Honda Prelude. This particular car is such a clean example with low miles, very little rust if any. It is such a privilege to look at these cars that are older, that are cool, that these were honest to God cars, that this is essentially a modified Honda Civic, for lack of a better word. But they did such little touches to it to make it such a cool car to drive, to look at. I mean, the thing looks good, and especially this one in good shape. We're going to check this out properly. We're going to talk about it. We had it in the shop doing some work on it. We'll tell you what we did. We'll show you everything, interior, exterior, and everything. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos if you are a returning subscriber. Well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's go check this thing out. So let's take a tour around this Honda Prelude. And there's something about this car that I love. This is, of course, old school mentality design. This is where less was more. In these times, right around 2000s, late 1990s, less was more. I mean, you look at this front end, there's not a whole lot going on. Headlights, very simple grille, very simple Prelude right here. And that's pretty much it. But yet, it has just a character to it. You have these creases in the hood. They just kind of turn into this crease. It's just a very, very simple, yet nice design. This is the kind of designs you don't see anymore. This car is too low to the ground. They don't make cars like this anymore. Everything is bulging and big. This is simple, yet nice. Then you move over to the side. Not huge wheels. I mean, you look here. We have mud flaps. This was something in the 90s. I remember the Mark III Supra had mud flaps integrated in the body. But this is what they did back in the day. They didn't really think that was an issue in a sports car, which it is. But going over to the side, you have very basic body line. There's not really much going on. You have one body line here, one very faint curve at the bottom, and that's it. The windows are kind of almost straight angles, nothing swoopy, or yet it has this classic coupe look. To me, when I stand here and look at this from the side, it reminds me of a Nissan Skyline. It just has this character to it that you don't see cars like this shape anymore. There's not much going on design-wise, but it's that simplicity of design. It just makes it super cool. I really like this car. Then we go over to the back, and if you look at this car right from this angle, to me, it resembles a Skyline. To a point, it just looks super nice, super basic. Again, we have the big taillights, Prelude written right here on the bumper. Dual tip exhaust, that was something very cool back in the day. Now, even a hybrid can have 4 tips. That's just how things changed. Of course, we have the spoiler. That's very important for Honda in the times. And we have the third brake light that doesn't really look like it belongs, because this was around the time where they changed the regulations and all the manufacturers had to add one. Very, very cool car. I mean, simplicity in design is what I love about this thing. And we're looking around it. Now, this car has been, in my eyes, completely painted. The whole thing's been painted. And not very good paint job, unfortunately. Because if you really come close, and we start looking at this area right here, we have orange peel, we have specks in the paint. Even though this is a pristine example, this quarter panel has been painted. The paint here, also you see the specks in it. Fortunately, somebody decided at some point to paint it. From far away, looks beautiful, but as you start looking at it with a microscope, you start seeing this stuff. Most people won't notice it though. I think with a really good buff, with a really good kind of body treatment, this will look a lot better because that orange peel will go away. Most of these specks in the paint, they'll even out, they'll get much better. So the only thing I would do to this car in this current state is give it a really good buff because it'll come out much nicer. But still, just look at it, folks. This is a really nice car. Very nice car. And what matters about this car is not really the paint and this. Let's take a look at the interior, but then we're going to lift it up and you're going to see why this is a pristine example of this car. And then we step inside the Honda Prelude. And the first impression I have about this, other than the creaky seat, as it comes with age, the dash. It has this slanted look in the back. It kind of reminds me of a Acura NSX, the old school one. Now, at a first glance, this just looks like a Honda Civic dash, but if you really pay close attention, it's actually a Honda Civic dash that is slanted back. See, this is the time where manufacturers didn't really care too much about materials, design. They just kept everything simplistic. They focused on the way this thing drives, which it does drive for what it is. Pretty nice, a lot different than a Honda Civic. Everything is nice and simplistic. You don't even, this is not even the horn here. The horn is a physical button. Things were very different. We have some aftermarket radio here, and actually there is a whole amplifier and stuff in this car. I really like this car. And then the shape of the seat, it's this, I don't want to call it a cloth seat. Velour maybe, that's what we're gonna go with. But this is designs you just don't see these days anymore. This is an automatic transmission. It's not a manual transmission, which is to some it might be an issue, but to me it's not because this thing drives really nice. Then you look at the carpet, and I like to look at the smaller details of things. Even the material of the carpet, the floor mat, and then you look at what's underneath it. It's just they don't use this thick carpet. You will not see carpet like this anymore in newer cars, unless you're talking about something exotic. But this is very, very thick and very high quality. You look how clean it is. Folks, you always judge a car by its interior, because this is where, if the owner takes pride and joy in this car, this is truly where it will show. You can buff the outside, you can paint it, but not a lot of people will redo an interior. And this interior shows. Look at this headliner. And it's actually not a fabric, it's almost like a vinyl headliner. Tiny little sunroof, pretty cool. Cute looking sunroof, small, but just look at everything. It's very clean, very neat. This has back seats that are sample back seats. They're not exactly functional back seats, but they're there. You can put your stuff in there and whatnot. But as far as people sitting here, I don't think that's gonna happen. Having said that, let's put this thing on the lift. Let's lift it up. Let's talk about the engine. Let's look underneath it, and so you can see why this is such a good car. Paint can be fixed. That's not a big issue. But what really matters is what's underneath it. So let's take a look underneath this beautiful Prelude. First thing you notice, and let's kind of skip this, we'll come back to this in a second. This is a rust-free car. I know you see this. This is just a short period of time that this car has been here that it has developed this. But folks, these were notorious for severe rust. And this thing is just beautiful. I have bolts that still have color. I have exhaust that doesn't look like it's all rotty and falling apart. Original exhaust, you can see the Honda logo right here. This is where this car is really shining. The body can be fixed. Anything that this car needs can be fixed. When the body's all rotten, it's done. And this is nowhere near that. Let's talk about the front. So this car was here we did a timing belt job and everything, and all the seals and everything. And one thing about this generation of Hondas, you know, I'm so used, and you see me coming this way, this is the transmission. This is the engine. This is when Honda used to do things different. They just upside down, if you would. So the engine is in the driver's side, the transmission is in the passenger side. Not all cars, majority are front-wheel drive cars. This is where you'll find your engine. But that makes service very interesting because you have to kind of change your mind around the way the engine turns, where everything is. But beside that, this is an H22 engine. I've worked on this engine before. I have some experience with Honda. I worked at a dealership briefly, not for a long time, but I have a lot of experience with Hondas. This is a very good engine, actually. Over-engineered, has a lot of quirks and little stuff when you service it, but it's a very good engine. Something about this Prelude that is interesting, look at the, I dare call it over-engineering in the suspension. These things drive really nice. You got this interesting looking strut that goes all the way to the lower control arm, and the axle goes through it. Then you have the sway bar and the sway bar link. Then you have another small support for the control arm. Very interesting design, not the kind of design you see in cars like this. But what is equally interesting is when we go to the rear suspension. Now, this style suspension you'll see in some old school Hondas. This is technically a double wishbone suspension. You have lower arm, coil over, and then another arm in the back, and then you have a full control arm at the top. It's pretty interesting. This is the old school design from Honda. Makes the cars drive really nice. They're relatively problem-free. They don't have a lot of problems. If you get the alignment wrong, it'll chew up the tires. Speaking of the tires, these tires are extremely old. This thing just sits and sits. This tire is past it, but he knows about the tires, and that's, you know, this is not a car he drives every day. It only has 97,000 miles, so that's, what a beautiful car. You got the big fuel tank here. Do you notice something about the fuel tank? This is metal, folks. We don't have that composite plastic fuel tank. This is a real fuel tank that rusts as well, and this one is, you got nothing. I mean, this thing is beautiful. I love working on these. Now, when we're setting the timing, we're going to talk about the timing belt job in a bit here. Otherwise, I love working on these because this is a rust-free car, looks beautiful, it's in great shape, drives really nice, and it's just I love the old schoolness of this car. Underneath, under the hood, the outside, the inside, everything. They just don't make cars like this anymore. This is the H22 engine. I really like this engine. It makes decent power. It's very reliable. It's a joy to work on until you get into some of the timing belt stuff, which we're going to talk about here. But for the most part, this is a very DIY car. For the most part, if you need to it gets a little bit tight in here, but it's not terrible. But let's look at some of the old school stuff. Distributor, spark plug wires, extinct stuff you don't see anymore. And then the giant behemoth that is the cruise control. This is bigger than an engine computer on a modern car, but yet this is the cruise control. And throttle that is cabled. That's why we have this giant behemoth. Very nice engine bay, very neat, clean, taken care of. And now that I'm looking at this, you know, these were the days where Honda put VIN stickers. This is the original fender, so is that one, so is the hood. I don't think this car was painted because of an accident. I think somebody just preserved it and decided, oh, let's just get it painted. They do a very good job. That's the only complaint about it. I love working in this car. I actually really enjoyed working in this car. I purposely took very long. I wanted everything to be perfect. The only thing we're going to report to the owner, there's a potential seepage from the rear main seal. You probably saw it through the video. But let me show you the goodies that we replaced, because there's something interesting about this engine. So this is a timing belt engine. Here is the drive belt. Here is the other drive belt. It's two drive belts, nothing exclusive about this, many cars in this area. But then we look at the timing belt. And one thing about Hondas and their timing belts, I mean, this is a drive belt. We're almost the same thickness as the timing belt. They love to do this stuff. I mean, you look at a Toyota timing belt, it's almost double the size of this, and they're a lot stronger. And these interference engines, of course, Honda Land, this will snap in, if you really push it, this will break. But where things get interesting is when I pull the other belt. See, this engine has balance shafts, two of them. Usually engines will have two balance shafts that are connected to each other, and then there is one output. Well, this engine has two balance shafts and two timing belts. So you got the two balancers, those have a belt that go to the crank, and then the cams in the water pump also have their own separate belt that goes to the crank. Makes it a very interesting layering thing going on when you take it apart. Some people make mistakes with the balancer and they end up taking it apart. Kind of hard to see the timing marks on one of them. The other one you can lock from the back, very simple. But here is the idler for the main timing belt, not the balancer timing belt, which interestingly comes with a sleeve that is a separate part. This is not actually a part that comes with it. This is a separate part. And then there is the tensioner for the main timing belt. The small timing belt for the balance shaft is manual tensioner, which is this pulley right here. You see this slot, it just slides back and forth. There's an arm, and then there's a spring that springs it back when you loosen it. Manual timing belts are interesting. You gotta have some experience, because you could either over tighten that timing belt or set it too loose where it's flopping around, or start humming if it's too tight. But the interesting thing is you have to take the entire valve cover on this engine, which is why there's a valve cover, there's some cam and crank seal, and one of the seals for the one of the balance shafts have a seal right there, and then all the spark plug tubes and all these goodies, all this just to do a diamond belt. A lot of parts. When he handed me the list of these parts, I just looked at him like, that is a bigger box than I expected, and it seems heavy. Then I remembered, oh yeah, it's an H22. There's so many parts you replace when you do a timing belt. Interesting. But let's kind of zoom in the engine, and I want to mention a few interesting things. See, initially when you look at it, it looks like this is a stretch belt that you have to, one of those stretch belts like Subaru, you got to fight it to get it off. But it actually has a tensioner, which is right here. But you got to loosen this, move this, and then you can take the belt. The alternator belt does also have a 10mm bolt right there. That's where your tensioner, the manual tensioner is. But the valve cover, actually this whole thing, and it goes over here. This area right here, it does not have oil, only from here back. This is just on top of the timing belt. Pretty interesting design. That's Honda in this era. They kind of took something normal that Toyota, Nissan, and GM, everybody else did. And they're like, how can we make this super exclusive and different? And they did. Honda came out with one of the earliest CVTs. Honda flipped their engine to the wrong side. Honda did so many interesting, quirky things in this era that this is a perfect example of it. This engine is very quirky to work on, but it's a pleasure to work on, because these things, on top of them being interesting in the way they look, the way they drive, actually pretty reliable, pretty cool. This, however, is a pristine example of that, minus the little buff that it needs, but that's all it needs. If you live in the Midwest and you know about these Preludes, this one is in great shape because it doesn't have really measurable rust. Folks, I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you enjoyed this car as much as I had the pleasure of working on it. It's been a pleasure. I really like this car. I think it's in great shape and really worth preserving. And if you own one of these, don't be afraid to work on them. They're a little tight when you get to the timing belt area, but it's not really a very difficult job. If you like this video, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.